Hello, I'm Cheryl Meyer, and I'm otherwise known as Cheryl M. Health Muse. And what my goal is to inspire you to lead a healthier life. So when I proposed my podcast, I proposed that we present it in two different segments. The first one is It Feels Good to Feel Good, Future-Proof Your Health, where I get to share everything I have learned to return my health back to relative wellness and to live a pain-free life in spite of the fact that I have autoimmune disease. But the second part of my podcast is this episode, and that's Tell Me Your Story, the Health Muse is in. My concept with this is it's all fine and well that you hear me tell my story, but I get a lot of, it's all fine and well that it worked for you, but it's not going to work for me. And I wanted you to hear that there are lots of people out there that have made changes in their lifestyle that have supported their health and brought them back to relative wellness. We all have a couple things in common. We all owned our own health. Whatever the doctor was suggesting we did was going on a parallel path to us making these lifestyle changes where we did things that cleaned up our toxic load. We all pay attention to our body. You'll hear jazz in the background because I want you to listen to the rhythm of your health, and I want you to pay attention to what your body is telling you. My body had been trying to tell me that I was going to topple over into toxic load for some time. I just wasn't listening. So if you clean up your lifestyle and if you listen to your body, you have a very good chance not of being deprived in any way, but returning to feeling darn good. And that's what these podcasts are really all about. So thank you for joining me. This is going to be a Tell Me Your Story, the Health Muse is in episode, and I hope you enjoy it. And I hope that we all inspire you to lead a healthier, happier life. Thank you.
Welcome to another edition of Tell Me Your Story, the Health Muse is in. I have a great guest for you today you might find it a totally different perspective, but it's a very important perspective in terms of things that you can do to help heal yourself. Our guest today is Hank Setala. He knew he was an empath as a child, but because I guess you were frightened about it, you can talk about that, he tried to mask it, and he masked it with alcohol. And so we're going to talk first about what did he do with the 5-step program to get past his alcoholism, and then how that opened up the whole world of his empath abilities. He became a shaman. He's a sound healer. His whole story is very interesting, and if you're not familiar with any of these things, then will be a huge introduction for you because all of this is important. So I'm really excited to introduce you to Hank Setala. Welcome to my show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I want you to tell people a little bit more about yourself than what I just said.
So, like she said, my name's Hank Setala. I go by the Sonic Shaman, and I blend sound healing along with Peruvian ceremony. I'm a trained Paqo Kuna, which means nature mystic. It is a South American tradition. And I blend everything I've learned together to customize things for my clients. And every client, my goal is the same, to help them perceive, know, be, and express your unique voice in this world. And a big part of that is healing, awareness, inner work. And that is really what the program of AA originally taught me. And then I took it to all kinds of new shamana levels.
Fabulous, fabulous. And I'll let you tell the story, but you actually dropped into the original tapes for the 5-step program.
It's 12 steps.
12-step program. Okay, sorry. Obviously, I'm not as familiar with it as I should be. But you actually were listening to some of the original tapes of the 12-step program, which ended up being a huge advantage for you.
Yeah, well, what it was, for one, I had a near-death experience at childbirth, and I think I came in just naturally tuned into other people's things. I always manipulated people very easily as a child. And then during high school, though, what the problem was is though I didn't really know I was intuitive to this degree yet. I was aware of everybody else's crap, but I didn't know it was their crap. I thought it was my crap. And so when I started medicating, it was in part to get rid of the awareness, but it just exponentialized the problem. And when I finally when I got to that getting sick and tired of being sick and tired moment, and I actually was starting to go to meetings and everything, with just a month of sobriety, I was having to go to Germany to pick up my wife because all the paperwork went through for the visas. And here I am going to the beer capital of the world. And I'm
which is
like,
tough.
oh, and I was had so much anxiety because if I were to relapse while I was there, like the whole process for rehab was going to start over. And I went to a meeting to meet my sponsor the first time. My therapist had set me up with someone that she knew, and he was a no-show. But this other guy who had the same name, Doug, who was just as new as me, I'm like freaking out about going to Germany. He's like, well, hey, my sponsor gave me these. I can get another pair of these CDs. Let me just give them to you. It gives, at least gives you something to listen to when you're in Germany, because there were no AA meetings in Germany. There was like one, and it was only in German anyway, so it wasn't going to benefit me. And my wife didn't know what to make of any of this. And so he gives me these CDs, and it was called the Paul Fisher Big Book Workshop. And it was this when AA first started, before you would go to your first meeting, you would go to these 4 1-hour information sessions before you would go to your first meeting. And by the time you were done with all these 4 sessions, you would have done all 12 steps. Where today in the rooms, you might go years before you do a 4 step. And so there's like the sense of urgency to do the work seems to have dissipated over time.
Interesting. But you found that to be a tremendous advantage.
It was because the very first CD, it, this is what part of my love for asking questions. You ask questions to gain awareness. And it's something I practice in a modality called access consciousness. Through the first part of the CD, he's asking questions. So, based on your own experience, did this happen? Based on your own experience, did this happen? And it's leading all the way up to the point where, and at this point, just to create context, I still thought I just have an alcohol abuse issue. I'm going to be able to go back and drink normally, quote unquote, again someday. And I'm listening to the CD while we're driving to some town or whatnot, and then going through these questions and thinking about my answers in my head. And then he said, and now based on your own awareness, oh, you're an alcoholic. And I'm like, oh, crap. I used a different word, but oh, crap. I am an alcoholic. And it was at that point where I really kind of turned it over that, this is really an issue, that I started doing the work and started to really get better.
Amazing. But you did do the work, obviously.
I did do the work more wholeheartedly on my 1 year anniversary. For the first year, I was a little bit of a drive drunk in a way, where we use that term, meaning that you're sober, but you really haven't gotten to the issues that led you to being an alcoholic. And so they say you white knuckle it the first year. And so the mantra, and this is a great tool for anybody who is, in any, regardless if it's addiction or some other thing that you're dealing with, the mantra that changed it all for me was this thing that my sponsor gave me: self-pity and gratitude cannot coexist. Because up until that point, I had all these things that this is happening in my life. I wish I could change it. This is happening in my life. I wish I could change that. My dad has very similar drinking habits as me. I'm not going to call him an alcoholic. That's for him to come to the awareness of or not. But I wish I could help him. And he said, stop right there. Instead of saying, I wish I'm powerless, I can't help, say, I'm so grateful that I'm in a space of sobriety, that if and when he's ready for help, I can be of service. And for a year, it was just a mental game. I would find something where I went into this self-pity area, and I would come up with this gratitude statement to shift the energy around it. And it wasn't till about the year mark that it went from just being a word game to going, oh, I am grateful. There was a tipping point. I call it like the teeter-totter effect. You keep putting weight on this side, and eventually it becomes easy, and you gain
Well,
this
and
momentum.
gratitude puts you in the now. So
Oh,
that is critical. I'm a huge believer in gratitude.
yeah. So like self-pity and gratitude cannot coexist. Or in Neil Donald Walsh's work, which I was a big fan of, he has this book called Happier Than God. And or actually, well, his original trilogy, I'm thinking about something else, but he would say there's these 5 attitudes of godliness, and one of them is gratitude. That the concept of source, the concept of spirituality is so big, we don't have words to fathom it. So like the degree you can be grateful is the degree you can be an allowance, is the degree you can be blessing, is the degree you can be all these things. So just picking one of those attitudes of godliness, he calls it, is the gateway for you to start entering into this holistic space and this holistic mindset.
Right. I, and for anybody listening, if you're not practicing gratitude every morning, I strongly recommend it. It starts your day off on a positive note and it will change your life because all of the negative stuff goes away because you're focusing on the now, on the positive. And I don't care if it's big or little, we all have things to be grateful for every morning.
Especially the things you're not grateful for or you think you are, like taxes. Just for an example, if you have a
Right.
tax bill, I'm so grateful that I'm so abundant that I owe this money in taxes. Like you can really shift any negative, which is really the only Satan seeing anything as negative. You can shift anything into a statement of gratitude, which changes the whole energy around it, and then that just creates this upward spiral of possibility.
And it changes your entire approach to life.
It absolutely does. And that's really what changed for me is my approach to life. Instead of life happening to me, it began to happen through me, and then everything shifted.
Fantastic. So, how long were you in Germany?
Oh, off and on a lot of times, but that particular time we were there, I think for 2 or 3 weeks. And it was, well, here's a fun story about that. When I was first going there and I was in rehab, I asked my wife, tell your dad not to buy me any beer, because normally he buys my favorite beer. Don't offer me any alcohol. And from the German culture, like this issue, at least for her family, it was so far out of their realm that she had no understanding of it. She's like, I cannot have that conversation with him. And so I go there with them knowing nothing about this. And I sit down at the table and he pulls up this big, like milk carton crate full of 1/2 liter bottles of Kustritzer, which is my favorite beer at the time. And he goes, Hank, I made you a present. And he puts it on the table. I'm like, I can't. And he's just like, what do you mean? And I'm like, I can't have any alcohol. I tried to tell him a little bit, but he didn't understand it. And then he has this big bookshelf with all these whiskeys and scotches. And he brings down like this really old scotch, maybe a 20-year-old scotch. He's like, have a drink with me. Have you ever seen such a selection? And I'm like, I can't. And then I just started crying. And he's like, okay, okay. He didn't really understand the problem. But that was like how fragile the space I was in. So when I say I was white knuckling it, I was just living on from my original moment of clarity, which was a couple of weeks back before this, I was working at the Bank of America at the time. And I was in a role of risk where we would talk to people with financial stress and take the credit lines away. And it was just, you hear all these sob stories and things. And I was just emotionally beat up from taking on this energy because I am an empath. And I didn't realize that
Yeah,
part
you
of it,
felt it all.
yeah, I like you're talking to somebody, just to give one example, I took someone's credit line away because that's what you do when they have, you know, you're not going to get paid back. And the guy, the man hung up on me and his son was on the line. He's like, I'm going to fax you my father's death certificate because you just killed him. You can't buy his medicine now. You killed him. And it's like things like that, you know, directed right at you. And as an empath, you're just absorbing all of that. So I ended up having like this emotional breakdown at work. And I had this moment of clarity where I just simply said, God help me. And today I would just call it universe help me, source help me, use whatever words you want. Don't let religion taint
Yeah.
the view of spirituality. And it was that day I ended up calling my therapist, who I'd been lying to for a year, that I was being sober, and I wasn't. I would just not drink like 2 days before I would see her and then buy whiskey on the way home after my appointment. So I was lying to everyone, including myself. But I had that moment where I said, God help me. And I ended up going to my first meeting that night. I ended up finding, going out on leave. I used FMLA to go out on leave to go into a rehab program. Everything started to change, but it came from that moment. It wasn't a request of the universe. It was a space of a command or a decree. Universe help me. And it showed up. It's not like, may I please have, it was, and that's why I tell people, when you're manifesting things, it's not that you're asking your universe, you're making a decree of what you're choosing to create. There's a huge difference. And in that space, there is only yes.
And you have to say it with conviction.
You say it with the totality of your being. In that moment, I was completely congruent. I knew if something didn't change, I was dead. And I wasn't ready to go yet.
I've also discovered how you ask the question is important, because if you're not really saying when you're asking what it is you want, you get exactly what you asked for. And then you
Yep.
sit back and go, why did I get this? It's because of how you stated what you wanted to manifest. So
Yeah.
you have to be very specific.
And energy and with manifestation, it works two ways too, because there's two truths and they always appear in opposition. One is the truth of the duality, and one is the truth of the oneality. And in the duality, opposites attract. And so when you're looking to create a healthy relationship, maybe the opposite relationship shows up first because you need to have a contextual field to know it. But from the oneality, if you're manifesting and actualizing with the totality of your being, like attracts like, and you don't have to have the opposite show up. And so it appears very confusing because people might put out for abundance and all of a sudden they're broke. And it's really the duality doing its job of creating the contextual experience so you know what it is to be abundant. But if you can manifest from the soul perspective, the opposite doesn't need to show up.
Right, right. So let me just ask the question, do you ever drink anymore?
I do not.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
No.
Because yeah,
But
that would be dangerous possibly for you, although probably not because of all the growth that you have been through.
but it wouldn't serve me. That's the thing. They say that your sobriety is 100% dependent on your spiritual fitness. So if I was in the space of even considering a drink, I've already slipped. Like I wouldn't consider it now because it wouldn't serve who I am being in this moment. Yet if I accidentally drink something with alcohol, it wouldn't like I wouldn't be going, oh no. The closest thing I've gotten to alcohol is eating a bourbon pecan pie. That was it. And I took one bite and I was like, whoa, it was like taking a shot of whiskey almost. And but I didn't go relapsing and things like that. But that is, I
Right.
think, one of the biggest things where people uh, stay in the addiction because they compare themselves and what their scenario is to another person who has the problem. And I almost didn't make it in that first couple of weeks before I went to Germany and really had that awakening. I go to my first meeting and they're passing around a basket and asking for money and it reminded me of church, and I had a bad experience with church and I'm like, what is this? And a guy comes up with a suit and tie and delivers a lead which sounded an awful lot like a sermon. And so it's bringing up all these things, and then he's talking about how he lost his wife, he lost his kids, he lost his car, he had all this stuff happen to him. And at that point in my life, though I was really run down from like emotionally and physically, I hadn't had any of those consequences. And so in my mind, well, maybe I'm not an alcoholic. None of that happened for me. My awareness shifted when in the big Paul Fisher workshop that I listened to, they talked about this thing called phenomenon of craving. You have a drink and then you have a craving for another drink. And that's the only real definition of alcoholism. It's more like an allergy. And when I realized that, when he was asking questions, so ask yourself, did you experience the phenomenon of craving? Well, yeah, I did. Ask yourself, did you ever make insane choices based on alcohol? Like I woke up and I didn't know where my car was, for example. And it's like based on my own experience, I had this huge issue. But had I compared myself to all the people who had all these big consequences, getting a DWI, none of that happened to me. But it was the framework of really understanding this is a craving and a medicating of a gift that is really the issue.
Well, and fortunately you connected the dots that that's what the craving was controlling. It was
Yeah.
controlling, it was subduing the gift.
Yeah, and that's where on my 1 year sobriety date, there was a thing called in Cleveland, which is where AA was born, or Akron. It's a little south of Cleveland. We have so many meetings, and they have these 12-step weekends where you go from a Friday night to a Sunday, and you would actually do all 12 steps over this weekend. And up until that point, other than work on my own, I hadn't really engaged with it that much. And that whole experience changed my life. I did that, and within the next month, I was taking my first Reiki course, and I found a place called Lilydale and this church called Fellowships of the Spirit. It's a spiritualist church, but they had a 2 year program of developing your intuition. And I started taking these classes, and what it did is it built a framework of me being able to use my gifts without being overwhelmed by my gifts. Because that's really, especially with an empath, you're just aware of so much that if you don't have some framework to allow that information to go through you, it could just be overwhelming. And then you start trying to shield. And one of the energy rules of the universe, what you resist persists. And if you're trying to push against something, you're actually giving attention and energy flow. And it's like eventually the universe, like you just have these situations that break down the walls and make you realize I need to pick something different. I need to do something different that actually works.
So that was in 2 years that you went to the school?
Yep, 2 years going through to Lilydale, and that's also in that 2 years, I just took everything I could. I took medical intuition classes, I took sound healing, aromatherapy, all these things. It wasn't until years later I found like what I consider my school three, my third year school of the Peruvian tradition of shamanism. It was just, it was a tradition that everything could be housed in. It was the one thing that everything made sense. I could bring every modality in, and I was just able to use it fluidly and fluently.
Is your wife on the same spiritual journey that you're on?
She was until kids. And I firmly believe that after she gets to play the mom role in our later years, she will be back. But we used to take classes together. She's a certified astrologer, same as me. She took level 1 and 2 Reiki, same as I. It just came to once the kids came in the picture, there was a huge shift in focus and attention. But she is 110% supportive of everything I do.
Well, which is important. It'd be impossible otherwise.
Yep. And even her parents have come around a little bit. Her dad told me after we went to Alaska, and in Alaska, there's 21 varieties of mosquitoes. It's so many mosquitoes that they have shirts calling it the national bird. And her parents thought I was crazy up until that point because they Googled me. And if you Google Hank Setala, pages upon pages about different events I've done or classes, it comes up, and they literally thought their daughter was marrying a lunatic. And we were there with this little bottle of lavender, and we would just put a couple drops on like this, and I got bit 0 times. My wife got bit maybe once, and they're using off and cutter, and they're still like getting eaten alive. And her dad finally said, "What's that stuff you're using?" And like, "It's lavender, it's a natural insect repellent, would you like to try some?" And he tried it, and it worked. And at the end of that trip, he's like, "Hank, I don't understand everything that you do, but maybe you're not so crazy." So that's where I
Yeah.
learned that there's these bridging modalities. Aromatherapy is one of them. There's science behind it, and then there's a metaphysical component. Sound healing is the same. There's science behind it, and there's a metaphysical component. And sometimes people need that because there's so much in the area of logic that they are not necessarily as willing to receive the metaphysical side. So those types of modalities are wonderful for those folks to wrap their head around something, and then you can start bridging into more
Right.
awareness and allowance of
Yeah,
the,
they don't have to be separated. They
yeah.
can find places to match. Interesting. I use tea tree oil with lavender for
Yep.
mosquito repellent because I'm a beam calling them within a 50-mile radius, and it works. I traveled because of being in the jewelry industry most of my career. I've been all over the world, and so I carried it because there are different bugs all over the world, and they love me. They would come out of the woodwork to find me, and it really protected me. And people would tell me, no, that can't possibly work. But I didn't want the chemicals even way back then.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's amazing how well some natural things work.
Yeah, tea tree is a natural insecticide. You could actually make a spray and put it on your roses and things, a couple other things too. But that lavender and tea tree was a wonderful combination.
I started using the lavender with it because the tea tree doesn't smell all that ducky, but it works like a charm. And with the lavender, it works even better. So,
Yeah, a wonderful combination. And then the thing that I found though is because one of the key things in AA, well, let me first say, nowhere in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous does it say you have to go to meetings. It does say you give away what you're given, and meetings is a great place to do that. Because just to be transparent, I don't actively go to many meetings nowadays, but I am working all the time with people that are having addictions or family members with addictions. And one of the things I found is when you talk about such a powerful process like the 12 steps, which is really taking a deep look inside and find it really comes down to where have I been unloving to myself or to another, and dealing with all that, just to talk about it from an umbrella perspective. As soon as you start talking about 12 steps to someone that doesn't have an addiction, it's like the wall goes up. Well, that doesn't apply to me. That doesn't
it
apply to me.
applies to all of us, I'm
It,
sure.
but it does. And
Yeah.
AA has roots in metaphysics. Like I happen to have gone to this place in Euclid, which is a suburb of Cleveland, called Rishi's Metaphysical Institute. And it was made by a guy named Raymond Cassidy, and his childhood friend was Dr. Bob, founder of AA. And he went to the schools in India and brought back all this information from the mystery schools in India, and they created the STEP program based on that information. And Bill Wilson, the other founder, had gone to Lilydale. It's just kind of cool that I happened to fall into both places where this originated. And they sat in mediumship development circles, and some of the information was channeled. So it has all these deep roots, but it was created with a kind of a Christian theme because that's what was needed at the time. But it's all a process of really cleaning house, doing your work, and getting rid of the limitations that might stick you from really finding your unique voice in this world.
I would imagine another advantage of the meetings is just having a supportive community,
It is. And if you
which
do your
at
work,
least in the beginning, if you're doing the work, you would need that.
especially, or in my, when I was going to rehab, there were some people that they looked up the anniversary meetings because they always had potlucks and food and things, and they were so in a financial situation they couldn't afford to eat. So they found out where the anniversary meetings were. They went there. They were using the program literally to feed themselves as well. So like definitely meetings are a huge contribution to support group wise. And most importantly, if you're not in the healing role like myself, it's so important to give away what you were given, to work with somebody else and help them pull out, because that's really where it comes out. You get out of yourself by helping someone else.
Well, and I truly believe, having gotten rid of the pain of autoimmune disease, it's the final step of healing. Is that you then go out to give what you have learned to other people so that they can enjoy what you have discovered as well. It's an important part of your process that you go out and help heal others.
Yeah, and there are some of the most amazing people in the rooms of AA. The one thing that I would tell people to be mindful of, if you are starting to go, I have seen sponsors within the program that they're not really advocating for people to do the work. There's a lot of what I call coasting, like meeting makers make it. Just go to meetings, but they're not actively doing the actual work to get to that freedom, to get to that space where you are having life through you instead of to you. And there's only one way you can coast, and that's downhill. So though I love the program, I believe that some of the old timers need a kick in the pants. Not everybody, but a lot of people need a kick, and look back to this Paul Fisher, this back to basics workshop of how it was done back when it was like a huge success rate. Nowadays, it's not as much. And part of that is people on paper, they have to be there because the court said they have to be here, and they don't really care. But doing the work is the really important thing, and then helping someone else. Those two things are really the recipe for all of life. Do your work, help another. That's where
Right,
we really have hope as a
right.
species, which is an acronym: help one person every day.
I love that. And I do these podcasts to give other people with similar problems hope. And that's why I want them to hear from people like you. If there's anyone out there listening to this that has a problem with alcohol, listen to what Hank is saying, because that will guide you to finding some of your own solutions.
Yeah. And one thing I was motivated to do, I took this class with Dick Sutphin. He's in spirit now. He just passed away last year, but he was considered the godfather of past life regression hypnotherapy. And he was teaching a class at Lilydale called Life Activation. And it was rounds of hypnosis to get to like one of your soul paths. And in one of the sessions that he did, I had this awareness of this acronym: as I forgive me, which happens to be 12 letters. And I was given the names for each thing as it is a process of inner work, but taking the addiction element out. So instead of calling it the 12 steps, this is a process of as I work through my stuff. But it's a way that I'm presenting it in a way that people who don't affiliate with the addiction world, that, hey, this is a tried and true process that you can go through and get the same results. I'm just not calling it that. So for anyone who's listening, on my website under training, there's a link. You can sign up. It's free. I'm just still recording some of the episodes, but you can sign up and do it as a pre-enrollment. And it is just this amazing process of getting to your root of what's really causing you to be out of whack or imbalance in your life, and causing things to show up that you really would rather not show up.
So now we know you went, I'm going to mispronounce it,
Lilydale.
Lilydale. So where did your spiritual path go from there?
Well, from there, I was really good at keeping everything separate. And I rebranded myself a million times, because I would take Reiki and then I would print business cards, Reiki, and then I would learn something else, and then I would do, like, I kept rechanging it. And it was then just still, I'm always looking for things, always looking for things. I was gifted these stones called Chumpy stones. I should actually, do I have some here? No, I don't have the set that I'd like to show. But it's like these stones from Peru that I found out later are part of a ceremony called the Chumpy Awe, which is like a belting ceremony to increase personal power. My roommate at Lilydale went to Peru with Ken Harsh and went to 12 different, was it 12? 8, 10 different villages, and got a stone from each village. So they looked like they were carved together, but they were from different places. And he got them for him. I didn't know this at the time, but he got them for himself. But when we were at class, Spirit said, give them to Hank. And he's like, really, Spirit? I went to Peru. I spent all these times. He then took him to Egypt and Hawaii. He's included him with ceremony and all these different places. And then he's told, give them to Hank. And I'm like, well, great. What are they? Chumpy stones. What do you do with them? I have no clue. He had not gotten any training. So then I start Googling Chumpy stones, Peru, which led me to a gentleman named Zane Kerfman. And he wrote the book Inca Mountain Magic, which is one of the few books, if not the only book at the time, that made any reference to these stones. And so I start talking to him and saying, well, what would it take for you to teach me these stones? I told him the story. He's like, well, it's part of an apprenticeship program. So I can't just teach you that. It like to use them, it builds on a lot of other things. And so for 2 years, I hosted him for classes and workshops, building enough interest for people to want to learn about it with me, because I needed so many people to actually hold a program. And then I finally had enough people, and we started hosting. I still host them today. We're just about to start another apprenticeship round in May. Uh, to host these programs where I finally learned this Chumpy Awe process, and then I gifted the ceremony to my friend Dave, and that's where I found out he never intended to give me the stones. They were for him, because he only gave me 7, and he had gotten 10. And when I gifted him the ceremony, he gave me the final 3 stones.
Oh my goodness. Do each of the stones have a different meaning?
They do, and originally there were only 5 stones. There's these energy centers in the Peruvian tradition called nawis, Nawis, and they're these lens or eyes of energy. And when the Spanish came in and they saw these 5 stones, they just misidentified that, oh, this is like the chakras.
Right. I was going to ask if there's a connection.
The nawis are how energy comes into or is expressed out of the field, where chakras is the energy distribution of the system or whatnot. And so because of the Spanish influence, instead of 5 stones, they started to make 7. And then they said, hey, if we make more stones, we could sell more stones to tourists. So they added like an 8 stone, a 12 stone, little hands and all that. But the original stones themselves were only 5 stones and was specific to these 5 energy centers. There's one at the tailbone for Mother Water, one at the navel for Mother Earth, one at the heart for Father Sun, one at the throat for the wind and the moon, and then the one above for the creator. And it's all about energy coming in and out of the field.
So they are in some way related to chakras because the meanings are the same. There just aren't as many of them.
Well, similar, but think of the chakra as a spinning disc, and it's
Right.
moving energy through the system. The nawi would be the place in your bubble, your aura, where you would allow energy to come in and out of your field. So they are related, but they're two. And that's one thing that the Carol would get bent out of shape of when they were talking about, like, in Kenchos, for example, oh, those are angels. It's like our guardian angels. No, it's not. They don't like comparing, because they say that the gold isn't the difference. And if you relate something away, then you might miss the real magic and the real potency that's there, because you thought you knew it already. You didn't look a little deeper.
Interesting. At one point in my life, I named a business Chakra Designs. And I did a lot of research on chakras, and I was amazed because they've shown up in ancient civilization in Africa, in very early American Indian culture, in some South American cultures, and then obviously in a variety of Asian cultures. And they were always 7 areas of light with similar meanings, but across, obviously in Africa, they had no contact with American Indians, but their dolls all had the same colors in the same order
Yeah.
as the chakras, which fascinated me.
And now science is catching up to that too. There was a neuroscientist who did a research study for access consciousness, which is one of the modalities I practice. And just a side thing from him researching it, he found that there are 7 bundles of ganglion nerve that ride on the lymphatic system, and they happen to be in all the places the chakras would be in. And they were able to start mapping, like, how when you focus on an intention for a certain period of time, how these ganglion nerves are pulling energy in from the environment, and after a period of time, it exponentially goes back out to the universe at a much greater potency. And so he was theorizing that that's the early beginnings of being able to start mapping the process of manifestation from the scientific perspective. And it's all correlating to the chakras.
Isn't that fascinating? Yeah, I actually have an aura machine. It's something I do with my health client coaches because the key is to be balanced in all the colors. People seem to think they want to only be in the upper chakras, and you
Yeah.
don't. If you're out of balance, if you're not if you're not in all of them. So it's a way to get that I can encourage people to do breathing exercises and things that will help them come back into balance.
Yeah.
So it's been a very useful tool.
Ooh, and if you have any sound healers near you, something we did at a psychic show one year, because I would go to all these different expos and things, and I do tuning forks. That's one of my main sound healing modalities. And I had a solfeggio set, which is all for balancing chakras. And so we had somebody sitting on the machine with their hand on the little device, and you could see, like this one was like a medical intuitive one where the, the colors would change and you could watch it live versus like just a picture. And as I would use the different ones, this is the room for the root, you would see red just come all the way through the field. And as I would do the balancing, you could see like how relevant it was, whichever fork I was on, the colors were all on cue and appropriate. So it was like a cool little testament to like the sound healing world of like just how on point they were when they were coming up with, hey, these solfeggio tones are good for chakras or a different set.
Right. Fascinating. Okay. So did you actually go to Peru?
I didn't. I brought my teacher to me.
Okay. Well, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. Well, that's how every time I've ever wanted to learn something, maybe at the beginning I would only take things. But when I wanted to learn crystal bowls, for example, I sponsored someone and put on a workshop. I found that why just go and take a class? I could create abundance for myself, host a class, learn it, and make money and create possibility for other people. So I kind of I took my manifestation to another level with that.
And are you still doing things like that? What are you trying
I
to
am.
learn at the moment?
No, I'm sponsoring my teacher for the shamanic apprenticeship program. And right now, is there anything else? I'm hosting classes for Access Consciousness. I have a foundation class coming up, so I'm still doing that. I haven't found anything else that has sparked my soul for me really diving into something new recently, but I will certainly be open to it. Now, sometimes I'm taking something more because of the teacher. One of the things I taught at Lilydale, at fellowship specifically, is the practice of NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, and the ability to look at your teacher and not get caught up in the story, but rather watch what's their physiology doing while they're tapping in and doing the things that they're doing. And then you sit down afterwards and you unpack them. So for one example, for mediumship, you'll see that when mediums on TV are getting a visual, you'll see them looking up. When they're getting a feeling, most of them you'll see them looking down. You'll see them turning side to side when they're saying that I'm hearing. So if you're looking to develop your intuition and you don't get visuals, look up. Your body is an antenna. And if you pay attention to the teacher and what they're doing with their physiology while you're learning what you're learning, you may find that if you emulate that physiology, you end up duplicating their abilities at a much more faster rate than if you were just listening to what they're saying.
Fascinating. Very interesting. I think I mentioned to you, my husband has been doing some shaman training in Tao philosophy and in Navajo philosophy. So he's going to be very interested to listen to this and your tips and things that you're saying. But he's loving it. He's always been somewhat intuitive and he's a mathematician. So he is just allowing himself to go into that realm. And I have blocked a lot of my intuitive because it frightened me. I didn't mask it, but I'm very careful where I put that energy.
Yeah, and I had a couple of scary things happen to me as I was stepping into my intuitive gifts, and maybe those are some of the things that really led to me to drinking them away, like seeing a friend get picked up in the air and kind of moved a little bit. I won't tell the whole story because I don't want to scare people, but I found that I started to shy away from my gifts because of these experiences. But in full awareness, there's nothing you ever need protection from because you simply choose differently. That never puts yourself in a place that you have those situations pop up. And had I been that aware, I would never have been in that haunted house to begin with. If I knew there was some spirit or something like that was going to scare me or whatnot, I would have chosen to be somewhere else. So the only true, for me anyway, the true protection is in full awareness, just with the absence of a judgment about it, because it's the judgments that we resist or react to that cause us to not see something.
And
It's
it's
in
the
the
fear.
lines.
It
Yeah.
was the fear. Learning not to be afraid of something has been a huge part of my spiritual journey because I'm very protected unless I'm living in fear. Once I'm in
Yeah.
fear, then I'm in trouble. So I have to work on remembering that and going back
Yeah.
to a place of peace.
One thing I found with especially firstborn children, like I see this with my son Max, is that we accidentally teach them to misidentify excitement with fear. And just to give you the example, like think about yourself as a parent with a newborn baby, everything that they're excited to explore the world. And as a parent, you're thinking they're going to get hurt and you're like, and as an empath, what are we teaching them? And so we were at Disney World and my son would not go on any roller coaster rides at all. We're in line for Slinky Dog, and again, we're thinking we're going to just have to do the parent thing where one rides and then the other one rides and all that. And I have the awareness. I asked my son, Max, are you really afraid of the ride? Or are you excited? And it really took him back for a second. He thought about it. He's like, I'm excited. And he went on that roller coaster and absolutely loved it. So for people who have a lot of fear show up, I really wonder, could part of that be excitement? And we're just misidentifying how we were taught to perceive excitement through our parents because of fear.
Right. Well, it's something else I've observed parents doing with children. I didn't have children, but when children start to have psychic experiences, they're told that they're not real. And it doesn't take very many years before that child doesn't see them anymore or talk about them or mention them because they've been told they were not real all their early years when they were having the experience, which is sad that we don't do anything to allow them to be who they are and to experience what they're seeing.
Yeah. But I've tried very intentionally to encourage my kids' intuitive abilities, playing games with them. Which elevator door will open first? What color car will go by down the street next? And I was even doing ceremony with them, like teaching them some shamanism. And my oldest son, Max, said, Daddy, you can teach us all about this shaman stuff when we're older. Right now, just let us be kids. And he had the awareness that this is really relevant, but I'm a kid. Let me enjoy my childhood. I can learn all this stuff a little bit later in life.
That's very cute. So let's say somebody's going to come to you. Why would they come to you and how would you help them?
Well, basically, one on my website, I have discovery calls available. So if you're thinking that I'm for you and you're not 100% sure, then book a discovery call and we can talk about individual experiences. But I'm a very mental healer. I would be called a yatchai. And I'm very good at, like, I have one session that I call storytelling session. So let's go through your story. But as you go through the story, I'm going to stop you and we're going to run processes and clearings and energy work and to change the point of view and the framework around the story. So that's like one big thing that I do. And then beyond that, there's ceremonial components. We believe in my tradition of shamanism that the masculine and feminine nature spirits of your birthplace hold the blueprint for the perfect you. But we've never been introduced to them necessarily, like at a conscious level. So like bringing people through a ceremony to reintroduce them to those spirit beings because they hold the blueprint for you, and also introducing you to your Wurkanuna Cheska, your sacred soul star of inspiration. So I'm really looking at it from the spiritual side as well as the mental side. And then I work with the functional medicine doctor. If there is something physical going on, I can be like, hey, why don't you see Dr. K, get your biofeedback session so we can really see what supplements would help, because I don't have that piece, nor would I want it. There's so much to remember.
And you're not, that's not your thing. So you shouldn't be doing that. Right. So that makes sense.
But I don't want to ignore that either.
No, they work hand in hand. One of the things I love about my functional doctor is she will always start from the holistic approach, always. It doesn't mean she can't prescribe medication, and it doesn't mean I haven't been prescribed medication, but we start holistic always, and we make that work first.
Another big thing is if I can't help you, I'll be honest about it. Or if I feel that there's a block, one of the questions I always ask is it for my hands? And if it's no, then I will refer you to someone. But there was this one time I was at a store called Goddess Elite, and there were two people that came for a reading because I do mediumship work as well, not as much nowadays. I focus more on the healing work, but I did the reading for the one friend. The second friend sat down and just the energy was so different. And I said, you don't really want a reading, do you? She's like, nope. I'm like, your friend forced you into it? She's like, yep. I'm like, we don't have to do this. She's like, great. And that was the end of the reading. As she was leaving the store, she turned around and said, if and when I'm ready for a reading, you're the one I'm going to come to. So I think it's the authenticity of people willing to, can I help everyone? No. Can I help most people? Yes. And if I really don't feel that my energy is a good fit for someone, chances are I know someone that is. And I can make the recommendation and referral to get you to somebody that is going to have the right medicine for you, the katari, the medicine that you have to share with the world.
Interesting. So do you do mostly group sessions? Do you do one-on-one sessions? Is it a combination?
Yeah, I do mainly one-on-one sessions, though I am putting together this group program where I can the full moon and the new moons, working with groups of people more from a ceremonial aspect of it. But the new moon to illuminate the hucha, which is our word for heaviness in the tradition, to illuminate the wounds and the energy that needs to be facilitated. And on the new moons, more to plant the seeds of possibilities. So those are two things that I'll do as a group thing, but I'll facilitate it on camera. And then I also have the crystal bowls and things. So it'll be kind of like a mini private sound bath with a little bit more of facilitation from the mental aspect of it as well, like letting everybody speak of it and working with the collective of the group. I do that in person now. Like I have a sound healing thing I do on the last Friday of every month. So today is my big day. But I thought it would be a wonderful thing to be able to offer that as a group facilitation. It's on my website actually. I just haven't put a lot of polishing into it, which is what I'm doing now with this next moon cycle.
Fascinating. And do people come from all over the United States to work with you, or are they mostly in the Cleveland area?
Mostly Cleveland, but I have had people drive a couple states over for sessions. I have one lady who she lives about 8 hours away. She's coming in for a weekend and she has some bigger ceremonial type things planned to do with me. So I work with people from all over, but I do it virtually as well. So you don't have to be in person, especially with the processing part, which might be looked at a little bit more as life coaching. All that is very easily done virtually. And even the sound things, you lose a little bit of the harmonic component because there's a element of the sounds interacting with each other through your physical body, but the sympathetic resonance you still get. So the frequency of a healthy chakra, if I'm using that fork, it's going to balance your chakra. You might lose the harmonic component of these two forks acting together, but the sympathetic resonance is there. So even the sound healing still has immense benefit by a distance versus being in person.
And when would you recommend sound healing for someone? Because there's going to be people listening who have no idea what we're talking about.
Well, sound healing can help anytime for any reason. There's literally a fork for everything. So if someone has organ issues, there's a fork for that. There's a chakra issues, there's Fibonacci. There's so many different tools that literally I could come up with a sound protocol that would help anyone, depending what's going on in the world. And I would make that recommendation based on what's going on for them. So like someone with addiction, Fibonacci is really good. If somebody is just feeling incongruent, solfeggio is good. If it's really an energetic thing, the regular chakra system set is all based on planet frequency. So I'd recommend that. It's such a broad area. We could do a whole topic just on that.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to sort of open the door so that they could start to relate to what you're doing.
Yeah, and for that matter, I sell tuning forks. Like if you go to my website, there's an online store. I have all the forks for sale. So if there's a particular set that people really feel drawn to that I use on them, they can even get that for themselves and work, when they're not one-on-one with me and get the benefits just doing some self-help. Because forks, unlike crystal bowls, which can be very pricey, forks typically are very inexpensive. And there's like things like the endocrine set that everybody could benefit from because it has like a thymus frequency, the pineal gland. There's like just really some forks that no matter if you're going to a healer or not are going to be very beneficial. Crystal tuner for energetic blocks, the Om frequency, which is for Mother Earth to help ground. There's tones that everyone can benefit from.
Fascinating. Okay, so if you had one thing you wanted to say to our audience today, one thing that you think might help them, what would it be?
Question everything, but answer nothing other than the question why. Because in the question, it brings you awareness. They've done topographical brain mapping on when you ask a question, how it lights up the brain differently. So if you say, what would it take for me to have infinite abundance versus I am abundant? Asking a question, it engages the brain differently and it puts it out to the universe to start bringing that to you. So if you really start to question everything from the space of what's going to create the greatest possibilities in your life, that is the key. Because once you start asking that, you're going to find the classes, the healers, everything that's going to help create and shift the possibility for you in life. And perhaps the greatest question is, what would it take to have more of my authentic voice in this world today than I've ever had before? And see what starts showing up in your life.
Fantastic. Okay, I will put all your links under this when it is live so that people can find you and explore what you have to offer. And it's been a great conversation. I can't thank you enough.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've had a blast, and hopefully you can come on our show as well, and we can have another great conversation with Dr. K all about functional medicine.
Yeah, and toxins.
Oh yeah.
Uh, I think what's wrong with our healthcare system is all the toxins in our life, and I'm trying to get people to recognize it and to start systematically reducing their toxic load.
Well, that, and I found we were just talking about this on a stream before this one, that your body actually, the toxins need to bind to something. So that's where like the world of supplements and things like that come into play, because you really have to give your body the tools that it needs. I just did a master cleanse a couple weeks ago, and I was about 24 days into it. And my body said, hey, you need to go on a raw diet. You need to eat this, this, and this. You need asparagus, all these things, because we need these things as the tools to finish the detox process. And then you're going to do another about 3-week run.
Right.
And so like when you really start to question what would create the most, that's how I got that information. I asked my body, what would create the most for us to work together more? Do a detox, do a master cleanse, and always being the question. Because once you find an answer, you stop looking. So it's always about asking a question, gaining an awareness, making a choice, asking another question, and continue that cycle to create the upward possibilities of your life.
Because you'll never know everything.
You'll never know everything.
And you need to continue to grow. And that's what makes this all so exciting.
It is. But thank you so much for having me on. This has been such a blast.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. It's been a great conversation. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, you too.